later.
Bring your A game today, man. Come on.
Brian wants that Notre Dame helmet up there, and he wants it now. I get
roll.
it. I get it. We'll get it up there. But let's get this show started, everyone. Bring it on in. Bring a friend or two or 50 with you. We got Brian Driscoll here. If you are not aware, folks, every Wednesday night, and blame this guy right here. We're late. The Miami fans were so hyped up over their win over that daunting Florida team, of course. But they were so hyped up about that win that we just couldn't shut them up. So we are here to talk Notre Dame football with all of you. And again, Irish Breakdowns, Brian Driscoll has made this possible. So I'm amped up. We had a great show last week, of course, breaking down Notre Dame and Texas A&M. Brian, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Just hump day, getting ready for this game this weekend. You know, got that big W behind them, and now they got to go get another one and keep this thing rolling.
Thank you so much for your patience again, Brian. Let's get right to it. So,
well, I made you wait for a whole season, Mark. So
you did. I've been begging Brian to do this for us, but no, Brian's been accommodating. Definitely, he's just a busy guy. So, I'm going to run down the narratives that I took away from this game because USC LSU was to me the most entertaining game of the week, but this was the game that I wanted to see more than any game. And it did not disappoint. Hey, if you wanted 42-40, yes, it disappointed those people, but we got what we expected. We talked about it last week. We got 13-13, 5 minutes to play, and Riley Leonard bringing the boys down the field. And you just saw so I'm going to go to the first takeaway that I had, and it's not a unique one because it was talked about ad nauseum after the game, and rightfully so by the sideline reporter talking to Riley Leonard and Marcus Freeman. It was the development that you could see in front of your eyes of this offensive line that is one of the least experienced offensive lines that we've seen that's had to be thrown on a field for a top 10 team. Just grow and grow and grow and make a lot of mistakes, but get better right in front of our eyes.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing you really wanted to see, look, you knew you were going to get mistakes for two reasons. Number one, not only are they young and inexperienced, but they're going against a very good Texas A&M defensive line, which is also something we talked about. And I think, honestly, Mark, I don't know if there would have been the same angst amongst Notre Dame fans if they had like 3 get-right games before, you know, game 4. Like, hey, we're going to have 4 games to get those guys ready, or 3 games, and then they're going to be fine. I mean, you're getting thrown to the wolves game 1, you know, I mean, and what we needed to see was just, will they compete? Will they battle? They're going to get beat. I mean, look, you could have started Joe Walton, Blake Fisher could have came back, and you were going to be worried about that Texas A&M defensive line, right? Because it's a great defensive line. But they battled and competed, and at the end of the day, when the game mattered most, they're the ones that did what they needed to do. They got a body on a body, got good movement, and, you know, everybody's talking about the Texas heat and all that kind of stuff. Well, fourth quarter, Notre Dame was the team that handled that better. It was Texas A&M players cramping up on the field and on the sideline. It was Texas A&M players that were kind of, you know, hands on their hips, and it was the Notre Dame players. You started to see the offensive linemen in the fourth quarter start to kind of run their mouths a little bit, like they were feeling it, and the Texas A&M players are kind of sitting there, hands on their hips, and they were tired because they had been fighting all game, and you know, it was certainly a key part of that victory was the fact that when it mattered most, offense, defense, special teams all stepped up and made the plays, but couldn't have done that if the offensive line wouldn't have stepped up and did what they needed to do.
And one of the most rabid places that you can play, and the offensive linemen also didn't get rattled. So they're facing that kind of front. They're facing that kind of crowd. They, you know, that's the one unit on the field more than any other where the components have to be gelled together, and they just got better and better. Now that you've reviewed it, is there any particular guys that you're especially proud of, especially stepped up?
Well, you got to look at the 2 young guys. I mean, look, I thought Ashton Craig didn't snap well, but he blocked well. I thought Billy Schrouth handled himself exactly how I thought he'd play. You know, lost some battles, won a lot more battles than he lost. I thought he was their best lineman. The 3 young kids is really where it starts. I mean, they went out and competed. I thought Emil Wagner was just steady throughout the game. Anthony Knapp and Sam Pendleton had a lot of issues in the game, you know, struggles with pass protection of not just knowing who to block. You know, at times they got tossed a little bit, especially Anthony Knapp got tossed a couple times by some of those big defensive ends. And, you know, Sam Pendleton had some misses and didn't finish quite right, but it didn't phase them. I mean, it really didn't phase them, Mark. And that's the key is they came out in the second half, and as they got their feet well a little bit, they started making plays. And, you know, I could point to 5 or 6 plays by Sam Pendleton. We're like, dude, you got to be way better than that. But go look at every big play that Notre Dame had. It was almost every time, I believe, right behind Sam Pendleton. because he made some huge blocks in that game. And that's what you want to see, right? Like, you expect the mistakes. But what I've always said, Mark, in one of my big frustrations with the previous head coach was the unwillingness to play younger players unless they had to. My whole point was always, you're going to have to live with some of those mistakes. You're going to have to live with the times that they don't get it right. But the trade-off is, but look what they do when they are right. When the more talented player plays, he's going to get better with more experience. But even when he's not yet experienced, he's going to have some plays like Anthony Knapp had on Saturday night, like Sam Pendleton had on Saturday night, where they're going to do some impressive things. And then when that happens and you got the backs that Notre Dame has, big things are going to happen. And that's exactly what. So we saw it on defense too. Here's the crazy thing, the focus on the offensive line, Mark. Notre Dame started 9 offensive players on Saturday night that either have freshman or sophomore eligibility, and got a 10-point win on the road in a game where a lot of national people didn't think that they could win the game.
Now, I think we uncovered some breaking news there that you have some issues with the previous head coach. I don't think anyone knows about that.
I've done a really good job of keeping that to myself and not really talking about it a whole lot, so, but on your show, I'll let everybody know. I'll let everybody know what's going on.
Oh, that's great. So you heard it here first. Wink, wink. We'll stay with the offense. Riley Leonard. Now, he's played better games, but when it counted, he kind of pulled it together.
Well, one of the knocks on Riley Leonard coming in was, not a great passer. We saw some of that on Saturday, but, he hasn't beat any ranked teams or teams that ended up being ranked or whatever. And, well, you can't say that now, right? I mean, he beat another ranked team last year, started the season off with a win over Clemson. And this is what you brought him here for, right, Mark? I mean, look, there's going to be days where he doesn't have it as a passer, but he's a playmaker. And that's what you and I talked about last week, is he's got to be a playmaker, and that's what he was. And Mike Denbrock did a good job of, okay, Riley isn't feeling it as a passer, so let's lean into some of the other stuff that we've got going on. But, kind of like the rest of the offensive line and like the defense and the special teams, when the game was on the line, Riley made his 2 best throws. And that's really where you need to be. Is he's going to get better. He's going to, get more on the same page, get in the rhythm and things like that. But he showed why you brought him in, and that was to make plays. And that was to show, I mean, you could see him on the sideline kind of smiling, and he just was kind of really calm. And you also need that from your leader as well. And the players responded. But at the end of the day, Texas A&M's entire game plan was geared towards not letting Riley beat him. And that was a big part of the reason you saw some of the plays open up that the other running backs had, is because there's this focus on attacking, on the edge to stop Riley. And, oh, hey, I got a couple running backs I got to worry about as well. And they went off and made some big plays in the game.
Brian Driscoll's here, Irish Breakdown. So this is not just a one-off, folks. Make it an appointment with us. And if I do a little bit better job of timing, we'll be here on time for all of you here at the Voice of College Football. And so another little programming note, last week we simulcasted on the 2 channels, and I got to say I was shocked because we had more viewers on the Notre Dame channel. That's just not something we really invested in, but you people showed up over there. So we're going to build the audience here on the Notre Dame channel. And again, Brian's making this all possible for us, so we appreciate Brian being here. So please, comments, questions, and super chat contributions are certainly welcome. So we'll stay with the offense. I didn't gain any revelations from the way the wide receivers or the running backs played. They played to the expectation that I have. I think it was a good effort out of that group in terms of being weapons. They weren't going to tear up this Texas A&M defense, and that wasn't the game plan. It wasn't that type of game. But what did you come away with from the running backs and the receivers?
Well, I thought the running backs did what we hoped that they would do. They're 2 very dynamic athletes. You needed to get big plays. One of the things I had in my keys to victory last week, Mark, was I actually think you were in that chat, listen to that a little bit. But I said, look, you've got to generate big plays. And big plays are going to be a big part of this game because neither offense was good enough to consistently move the ball up and down the field against what are 2 of the better defenses in college football, in my opinion. So you're going to have to generate big plays. Texas A&M, I don't think, had a single play over 20 yards in the game, and Notre Dame had 5. And that really it was a big part of this game, and the running backs fueled it and should have had another one. I still think that was a very questionable holding penalty there on Ashton Craig. But then you come back on the very next play on 1st and 25, she was a little bit shorter than that because for 1st and 20, but I think it was like 1st and 14 because it actually happened down the field. And then you run another play and you gain 29 yards, and that was a big part of it. So I think the running back showed me that they've got some playmaking ability, and we knew they had it in practice, and we'd seen it in flashes last year, but could they do it in moments where they were the guy? And I thought they did it. The receivers were okay. Look, there was a lot more opportunities, Mark, and I could send you a couple clips from the all 22 that, where Chris Mitchell's open on a dig cut, and on that same play, Bo Collins beats a corner so bad on a corner route that the guy falls down, and if Riley reads it correctly pre-snap, he's wide open for what would have been about a 50-yard or so touchdown. And so the quarterback didn't get them the ball as in the places they needed to, but there was also some times where they didn't do themselves enough favors off the line with good enough moves, and the blocking was inconsistent, but Jaden Thomas makes a huge block on the touchdown run. So it really looked a lot like, to me, what you expect to see in the first game, Mark, which is a bunch of guys trying to get on the same page. And, but again, it's, as a coach, Mark, you don't worry as much in game one about the assignment mistakes, the technical mistakes, because you're not a finished product in week one. But what I believe and what I've always felt as a coach and what I feel now is you don't need experience to play hard. You don't need experience experience doesn't necessarily tell you whether you have fortitude or not. And what this team showed on Saturday night is that they have that. They're gonna fight. They're gonna compete. And when their backs are against the wall, they're gonna go out there and not shy away from the moment and make plays, because that was a loud, great environment on Saturday night. And this team has showed some they have shirts that say grit on the back, and you saw that on Saturday night. That's exactly what that was.
So, Brian, what I can't figure out, but also seemed to be just a talking point, and how, especially these national TV games, they build a couple narratives, and then if they're reinforced, then they just hang on them. And the offensive line, understandably so. The secondary. So we know the secondary is talented. We know it's a good secondary, but considering that Texas A&M's as limited as they are in the passing game, and especially a wide receiver, I heard a lot of talk coming out of this game. Wow, look at the secondary. The secondary is amazing.
Yeah.
Your thoughts about their play?
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, did you expect Texas A&M to light Notre Dame up throwing the football? No, I didn't. I don't think you did either, right?
No.
But there's not lighting a team up, and then there's only having 100 yards on 30 attempts and only averaging 3.3 yards per attempt. I mean, there's a big difference between, we didn't expect them to light it up and, having that level of production, right? And when you look at what this secondary has done, this is kind of par for the course for the secondary. So I think that narrative is sometimes, Mark, you and I both know there's narratives that go into games and come out of games that aren't really backed up by facts or maybe how the game played out, but this Notre Dame secondary was elite, and it allowed them to make a lot of plays in other areas because Al Golden can just say, hey, listen, I'm going to put my cornerbacks on an island and lock you down, and then that allows your safeties to do what? Kind of roam and do different things against the run and against the pass. And even the first interception, people said, oh, he sails that ball if he throws an accurate pass. If he throws an accurate pass, Adon Schuler is driving down on that route. Maybe he catches it. Maybe he doesn't. But you also had a defender underneath. That's not as easy to throw as people think. It may be easy on college football 2025, but it's not easy in real life, especially when you got Boubacar Traore coming right in your face on your throwing hand. So, but that's just kind of what Notre Dame does. I mean, they play tight coverage. They throw a lot of different looks at you from a coverage standpoint. And the fact that you had Adon Schuler and Christian Gray making two of the biggest plays of the game and not Xavier Watson, Benjamin Morrison, is probably where the next 11 opponents are like, seriously, come on. I've already got to deal with Morrison and Xavier Watson. Now I gotta have Christian Gray locking people down, and I got Adon Schuler out there making plays. You gotta be kidding me. This is Notre Dame. They're not supposed to have athletes like that. But they do. And that's the job that Mike Mickens has done. And this Notre Dame coaching staff has done, is Marcus Freeman completely rebuilds this roster in his image.
So the evaluation of any win can be made in the moment, but then we're not going to know how good is Texas A&M,
Sure.
although I think we've got a pretty good beat that they're a top 25 team. They're a really talented team, stout on defense, but they're nothing dynamic. They're not an elite team, but I'm going to guess they're going to go 8-4. I'm going to stay with my preseason prediction with them. But then we get to see how it plays out for Notre Dame to see how important was this win. But as it stands right now, because obviously, look at Florida State. Wow, they are the the most talked about team in college football from the standpoint of just what happened. But there's USC at the end. Obviously, Louisville stands out as well. Okay, so as it stands right now, this is the biggest regular season win for Notre Dame. And I hate to rub it in as I state regular season win. I guess we could say total win for Notre Dame since when?
2022 against Clemson. I think it's their biggest road win in a longer period than that. But you're talking about 2022. You're playing the number 4 team in the country. You're 3 weeks removed from losing to Stanford.
Okay.
You're 5-3. I don't know that Marcus Freeman can get to, like, you know this, Mark, when you start off really rough in a new job, you may never have the patience to build it the way that you want to build it. And that's why that game was so important. Number one, it was a better team. I mean, Clemson in 2022 was a better team than what Texas A&M is now. Notre Dame was scrambling. They had lost to Marshall. They had lost to Stanford. What happens if they lose that game? And then they got to go play Navy the next week after another loss. Who knows how that season spirals if they lose that game? So I think that was a bigger game. And wins are building blocks, right? Like, people look at the Oklahoma game in 2012 as like, that was the game. And I'm like, no, the game where you really knew Notre Dame was good was actually when they beat Stanford. And it was the Stanford game that led to that game. And for me, I don't know if Notre Dame gets to the point where there's the energy around the program that there is if they lose to Clemson and go 5-4. And again, Clemson at the time was the number 4 team in the country. So now, biggest road win. I mean, I'd have to think about that one, Mark.
That was a road game.
No, Clemson was at home 2 years ago. It was the game where they blocked a punt for a touchdown, and Morrison had to pick 6 against Kate.
They killed them.
Yes, but that was at home. That was a home game for Notre Dame.
Why am I blank? I was taking the Clemson perspective there.
No,
yes,
it was a road game for Clemson.
Yes. You are a Notre Dame guy.
Longest road. I mean, I'd have to kind of quickly think through in my head, but I'd say this is probably the biggest road win that Notre Dame has had since 2012 when they beat Oklahoma. I mean, I don't know that, like, from a perception standpoint. I mean, you could argue, okay, how good was NC State? But when was the last time Notre Dame went and beat a Power 5 team on the road that was ranked in this kind of environment? It's been a while. I'm actually going to have to go through the schedule and kind of do a little bit of a thought process on that, Mark. But road win for sure. But I still think Clemson, and I've actually been asked this question a couple times on our show, so I've had time to think about this. When was the last time Notre Dame had a game that was this big? And I'm like, look, this was a great win. This is still the number 20 team in the country that went 12-13 the last 2 years. You didn't beat Georgia this weekend. You didn't beat Alabama this weekend. You didn't beat Ohio State this weekend. This is a much needed victory for Notre Dame, but it's just a building block. There's much bigger fish out there that they have to go catch and then hopefully beat.
No, it's an astute comment out of you about targeting that Clemson game. And I don't know why I was having a mental block about taking sides, because I know clearly that game was 35-14, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they had a pick 6 as soon as they brought Cade Klubnik into the game, put him in a bad spot, like inside his own 5.
Yeah, he got picked off by Benjamin Morrison. He didn't take it back to the house, but they recovered it. I mean, he picked him off at like the 12.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, why are you putting that kid in that moment? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so
then they block a punt.
They blocked. So their first score came off of I think it was Prince Colley blocked the punt, recovered it for a touchdown. I believe he also blocked it. Maybe it was Jordan Patelho. And then I think their second touchdown came off of that was the Morrison pick. They brought in Cade Klubnik, backed up inside his own 10, brought him off the bench. He gets picked off. And then they had a long drive for another touchdown. And then that you had the Benjamin Morrison pick 6 in the fourth quarter that really, I think it was like 21-0 when he had that, and that kind of put the game away. And then they had the sort of the icing on the cake touchdown pass to Michael Mayer that made it 35. So it was never really competitive. I mean, and Clemson's offense could do nothing against Notre Dame that day. And that was kind of the coming out party for Benjamin Morrison as well. You know, I mean, you watched Benjamin Morrison play really well in the first game of the year against Marvin Harrison, but nationally it was sort of his coming out party with those 2 picks.
Brian Driscoll's here breaking down Notre Dame football. Of course, you can catch him every day at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Irish Breakdown, and you should be locked in on that already. And even if you don't like Notre Dame, it's a college football listen for sure. And while we went there on the Brian Kelly topic, obviously he coached one of the marquee games of the weekend, but it was a toss-up. So for me, obviously the result of the game is why they play, to mark down who won it, who lost it. But there's a different evaluation to make, like you just brought up that Clemson Notre Dame game from a few years ago, 35-14, where that's just an annihilation and you got to completely recalculate. The number 4 team in the country did that. Well, they're not the number 4 team in the country, versus it would still have been not a good showing for Clemson. But if they lose 31-28 at the gun, it's just a completely different deal. LSU has, for the second time in at least 3 of these first game situations, lost basically in the last play of the game. Do you think really Brian Kelly did anything to lose that game, or it was just 2 really good teams going at it and they just came up short?
Did he do anything in the game? Maybe. There's always things that you can look at, Mark, and say, maybe they should have made a different call here. Maybe they should have made a different call there. It really isn't about that with Brian Kelly. It's about preparation. It's about, you've got a junior All-American future first-round draft pick left tackle who's running his mouth before the game, and he gets 2 false start penalties, right? Everybody's worried about Notre Dame's freshman getting false start penalties, but Will Campbell gets 2 false start penalties. You know, you turn USC over on downs, you're up, what was it, 17-13 at the time? One of your players is running his mouth, gets a 15-yard penalty, right? Marks them way back. That changes things. You score a touchdown and you do that, and you're getting it's that lack of discipline that and the lack of preparation, the lack of focus that Brian Kelly's teams have always struggled with so much in these moments. Because this isn't like it'd be one thing if there wasn't a pattern here, you know, but Brian Kelly's teams at LSU are 3-7 against ranked opponents, 3-7. And at Notre Dame in his last 3 years, they were 5-5. So in Brian Kelly's last 6 seasons, his teams are 8-12 against ranked opponents. That's a pattern, Mark. I mean, obviously, and it's a pattern where they don't play to their ability. They don't have the same focus. They're not as mentally tough or physically tough as their opponents in most times. And if you go back and look at the games they won the last 2 years, it was usually Jaden Daniels or somebody kind of putting the team on their back and just making some crazy plays. It wasn't like, wow, what a great game plan and things like that. So I don't know that there's a lot of things I'd point to from a play calling standpoint. I thought USC had more coaching mistakes in the fourth quarter than LSU did. And I'm like, good Lord, a buddy of mine texted me. He's like, dude, Lincoln Riley's trying to give you LSU this game. And he did, but Brian Kelly was like, no, we don't want it. You guys take it. It really just comes down to Brian Kelly's team, once again, was not prepared to handle the moment. And that's kind of how it is. I'm not taking shots. You can say, oh, you don't like Brian Kelly. Hey, all right, then convince me how an 8-12 record in the last 6 seasons is not evidence that what I'm talking about here is a football conversation, not a personal conversation.
And when you're at the 7 or 8 minute mark in the fourth quarter, you're up a score and you had 2 stops. Therefore, your offense had 2 opportunities to make it a 2-score lead, and you don't get that done. And when you bring up mental toughness, USC's not exactly been the epitome of mental toughness unless they've suddenly gained that. So it's not like Notre Dame was going up against some battle-tested, hardened champion in USC. You talk about
that's what I'm saying. USC tried to give them the game. I mean, just turning it over on downs, making poor decisions in that regard, but LSU just kept giving it back to them. And, at the end of the day, USC's players they just made more plays. But, when you watch LSU down the stretch of that game, this is where I will say decisions that Brian Kelly makes. It was Brian Kelly going away from what got them there, right? That's kind of what he's always done. First half of the game, they can't cover the LSU receivers. USC made some adjustments. LSU didn't. And so when they stopped having quite as much success, they're like, okay, well, let's run. We got a lead. Let's run the ball. Like that's what gets you beat so many times. And that's what's happened to Brian Kelly for years. I mean, heck, not that long ago, 2021, Notre Dame goes down to Florida State. They jump out to a 38-24 lead. They literally can't cover the Notre Dame receivers. And so what does Brian Kelly do? Okay, let's run the clock. Let's run the ball and go. You're only up 2 touchdowns, man. And it's the third quarter. And then they lost all that momentum, and then they couldn't get it back. And that's if you want to point to coaching mistakes, it's that. Yeah, it's great that you tried to run the ball, but you didn't get there by running the ball constantly. You got there because you were balanced. You mixed up the runs with the throwing the football, getting guys downfield, and and they went away from what worked. And I thought the LSU defense, who's still not very good, I thought they competed pretty well, but you can't keep giving a team with that many weapons on offense that many chances in the second half of a football game and expect your defense to keep making stops every single time. And if I'd have told you before the game that LSU is only going to throw for over 300 yards and only score 20 points, you'd have been like, I don't see how that's going to happen with that offensive line. But that's what happened. But I do think this is a different US. I've been saying it all offseason. D'Anton Lynn was a huge hire. And I think you and I did you and I talk about that last week? Or I know we talked about that on our Thursday show, but that was a huge hire. And this is exactly what you brought him in to do. He took over a terrible UCLA defense from 22 and in 23 turned him into a really good top 25 defense. And he's going to do the same thing. I don't know top 25, but he's going to do the same thing as far as they're going to be better coached and they're going to be tougher. And as I've said all along, their defensive problems were a Lincoln Riley problem because of the way that team's prepares. But from what I've been told, he's given a lot more authority on the other side of the ball from a preparation standpoint to D'Anton Lynn, and I would hope that he demanded it. But at the end of the day, I still think this was a LSU just doing Brian Kelly things, which is just not being mentally or physically ready to really compete on the biggest stage.
Well, again, with USC, they've obviously changed a ton of body types on that team on the defensive side, and it showed from the first drive. I thought they are invested in tackling. They are hitting. They look tougher than they have in years on that side of the ball. Now, I didn't know if it would last, and there was a point in the fourth quarter again when LSU looked like they were going to put the foot down on their throat, and they were running John Emery time after time, and he's just ripping them apart. But they withstood it. And again, it wasn't all just based on Lincoln Riley and USC. It was partially gifted to them, but still they did weather the storm midway through the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. And they were the better team the last couple of drives of the game on both sides of the ball. So I give them a lot of credit for toughening up with a little adversity that they hadn't shown in the past in regards to any kind of mental toughness there. While we're on the point of coaching acumen, you probably saw this. I don't think I brought it up last week. And if I did, certainly shut me down because I think I was about to, and we got into the Texas A&M breakdown. But there's a clip, and I don't know what show this was on, but Marcus Freeman was on somebody's show. I don't know who the guy is, didn't recognize him, looked like a pretty decent high-level podcast. And he was given a bunch of coaching questions. The only one I think that went viral was so he was given a game situation, Marcus Freeman. Did you see this, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. About the 2-point conversion. Mm-hmm. Okay. What was your response to, well, just to set up the audience in case you didn't see this, folks, Marcus Freeman's on a podcast and asked Coach, you're down by
a bunch of analytics questions is what he was.
Oh, all of them were?
A lot of them were, I thought.
Okay. I would have loved to have seen all of them, but I only saw the one. And Marcus Freeman was asked, okay, here's the situation. You're down by 2 touchdowns, meaning 14 points. You got the ball. I think there was 4 minutes on the clock. You score a touchdown. Do you go for 2? And Marcus Freeman said, absolutely not. I kick the extra point. Your thoughts about his response?
On the first touchdown, yes. You kick the extra point. And the reason that I think that is because you're going to need a 2-point conversion if you want to win the game. Right? So you're down 14 points. Is correct? Was that the scenario?
Yes.
You're
Down
down 14.
14, like 4 minutes left.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're going to go for the win, that's fine. Go for the win, but go for the win the second time, because you don't have. This is what a lot of these people that don't play the game or never coach the game. You don't have a whole lot of 2-point conversion plays in your toolbox, right? So what if you get into a situation where you've got this is the thing that can hurt you in overtime, right? Like, well, what if I've already used a 2-point conversion or two in regular season or regular time? What do I have in overtime? But in that situation, you want to put yourself in position to where if we want to go for the win, we can, but you don't want to be now in a situation where if the first one doesn't make it, now you've got to go to your second best 2-point conversion play in hopes of tying the game to then send you to overtime, where if you get into the second overtime, you now have to go to your third best 2-point conversion play to try to now go win the game in overtime. That doesn't make a lot of logical sense. I know whatever the analytics say, but logically speaking, that just doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to need a 2-point conversion to win at some point in time, go for the second one. Because if you make it you get 8 and you're down 6, you still need a touchdown to win, right? It's not like it has any impact on the field goal or anything like that. So that's just my take on it. I'm going to wait until I have to go for 2 before I do, because this is what happened in Notre Dame in 2015 against Clemson. Brian Kelly went chasing points earlier in the game. Had he just kicked the extra point, you're either going for 2 at the end of the game to win it, or you're going for the extra point to tie it, and you've got all the momentum. But because you started chasing points earlier, you're now in a situation where you have to go for 2, and it ended up not working out. So I don't like chasing points and like that until I have to.
Okay. That was the 24-22 loss in the rain, right?
Mm-hmm.
At Clemson. Okay. This is why I've changed my mind. So, and I didn't change my mind like 2 days ago when I saw this. I mean, about 5 years ago, I changed my mind on this situation. Because I would have always said, well, you kick the extra point and then you kick the other extra point, you go to overtime, because the extra point is an almost certainty, of course. But I've changed my mind because I'm gaining a little bit more respect for these analytics, albeit, let's understand. Here we go, Brian. I'm going to explain this to you, so maybe I can change your mind. So let's understand, when we throw out analytics, the analytics don't know how good your quarterback is, how good their defense is, all
what the
those
environment
things.
is it raining? Is it windy?
Yeah.
Right.
So let's throw all that out. Yeah, if I've got Tom Brady running my off, those kind of things.
Right.
One of the most ridiculous, and I go back to this all the time when I'm arguing with people about FPI, for example, because they go into those game probabilities. You're watching the highlights at the end of the night, and they're like, so and so came back from 38-17 down in the third quarter, and it was a 99.6% certainty that they were going to lose the game. Okay. Have you ever watched college football, people?
Exactly.
So the one I remember wasn't even a college football game. It was an AFC championship game. And I could not believe this FPI number. It was the Patriots-Jaguars game. I think this was in 2017. Jacksonville's up 20-10, 10 points with 9 minutes left in the game in Foxborough. And the FPI is giving them like a 98.5% chance of winning that game. And I'm thinking, this is like a 50-50 game. Tom Brady's down 10 with 10 minutes left in the game at home. That's like a 50-50 game for me. 98%. This thing is faulty. All right. Back to this situation. Okay, here's my thought. Because I used to be right there with you. Here my thought is first of all, if you take this game to overtime, your chance of winning is, again, throw out all the intangibles, 50%. So we are only talking about getting you to a chance of a 50% chance of winning the game. So if you can avoid not having to play yourself into a 50-50 coin flip and you can win in regulation, that's obviously the best possible scenario. So first of all, you go for the 2 down by 14 with 4 minutes left, because if you get it, hey, you're in great shape. If you get it, then the next time you just kick the extra point, you win the game. Okay. If you don't get it, you still have the opportunity to, of course, go for the 2 points and tie the game. Okay. Again, because you were trying to avoid a situation in which, at the very best, you're only getting to a 50-50 proposition in overtime versus trying to win it. And you've got 100% chance of winning the game if you win the game and score more points in regulation.
Yeah, so you and I are on the same page on part of that. First of all, college rules overtime different from NFL rules. So it's a little bit of a different thing where you're kind of beholden to the coin toss in college. But I'm not saying don't go for the win. Your question was, do you go for 2 on your first attempt? So my question would be is if you want to talk about odds, if you're trying to go for the win, do you have better odds of kicking an extra point and then getting a 2-point conversion or having to get 2 2-point conversions? Right. And so to me, if I want to win the game, I'm kicking the extra point because if I score again and they haven't scored, I now have all the momentum. Defense is on its heels. This is the emotional part of the game. You just scored. It's like Brian Kelly made that decision 2 years ago to get one of the few big wins he's had at LSU is I'm not going to overtime against Bama. I'm winning it now. I agreed with the call. It was a great call. It was a gutsy call, but it was the right call. Because if you don't get it there, you're going to get crushed by your fan base. You know, because it's always a great call when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's a horrible call. It was the right call. I've never felt, like I said, I'm okay going for the win, Mark. Totally okay. I'm not a big fan of going to overtime because you know, do I want to take a chance of I got one play, a couple yards away to win it, or I've got to score from 25. I got to stop them from scoring from 25. A lot of things can happen. I'm taking the one play to win in most instances without any context. Because like you said, okay, my starting quarterback's knocked out. I've got my backup quarterback in the game. That may prompt me to not do it. That may prompt me to actually, I want to do it because I'm not going to ask this. So there's all types of things where,
Sure.
Hey, look, we've battled back. We've got all the momentum. Their best pass rushers down. Their starting quarterback's out. Let's get to this overtime because there's all types of scenarios. But without any of that context, I'm totally good going for the win. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to try to search for those points the first time you score once you're down 14, right? Like, so kick the extra point, and now you don't have that same pressure of, okay, we got to do this. But again, it comes down to this. You have to understand how you prepare for a game from a coaches and player standpoint. You can't spend all week practicing 15 different 2-point conversions. I'm being hyperbolic with the number 15, right? You only have a couple in your tool belt. And then once you use those, you pretty much can't use them in future games either because teams are going to be prepared for those. So if I'm going to use my 2-point conversion plays, one of my few, I'm going to use it when it matters most. And it's going to matter most the one time where it's either it works and we win or it doesn't and we lose. That's just kind of how I am. I don't want to start chasing points until I need to. So again, you and I are on the same page as far as the end result. I don't want to go to overtime. I'm going to go ahead and win it now, right? More often than not, that's kind of how I feel. But I just don't feel you put yourself in that situation where you're going for two too early. That's my takeaway on it. You don't need to chase it too early.
Well, no, I'm not about chasing points early in a game. No, yeah. I hate that when.
I'm not saying early in the game. I mean, like you're talking fourth quarter, right?
Yeah, we're talking like 4 minutes.
That's still too early because I still need another score, right? Because here's the other thing: what if one of my scores I need is a play where I've got the ball at the 2? Okay, that's another situation where I've now have fewer things in my tool belt because the play that Notre Dame got stopped on for the 2-point conversion. They ran earlier for a 2-point conversion or for a touchdown, I believe, and it worked. Well, they saw the play now. It was a little outside zone type of play with Deshaun Kaiser. You get your 240-pound quarterback kind of rolling, and they ran it earlier, and it worked. I can't remember if it was for a touchdown or a 2-point conversion. I'm going to look that up real quick. But then when they went back to it later because they didn't really, like I said, they didn't really have a lot of plays in their tool belt for that type of situation. They went back to it later, and it didn't work. It was so Notre Dame was down 21-3. They scored a touchdown, went for 2 then to try to make it a 10-point game instead of being down 11. So then they went for it again later. It was a touchdown. So Deshaun Kaiser ran that play from 3 yards out for a touchdown. And then that was the play they tried to use to get the 2-point conversion, and obviously didn't work. So there's a whole lot of scenarios that I understand the math. I get it. But what's not being discussed or not is, but what is the preparation to get to that play? This isn't NCAA 2025 or Madden where you literally have 1,000 plays in your thing that you can just kind of go to and play. This is something, have you repped this? How much practice time do you have? And all those type of things. So I'm all for going for the win, Mark. Totally fine with going for the win. I'm just going to try to get that play when I really need it. And that's kind of where I'm at for that.
And the other probability portion of this to keep in mind, folks, would be that I know an extra point is considered a give me. What does the average field goal kicker in college hit? Maybe 97%? Is it that high? Something like that?
For extra points?
Yeah.
It's a lot higher, Mark, yeah, in college because of it's a 20-yard
well,
chip
sure,
shot.
yeah, than what the NFL has to deal with now, where it used to be like 99.4 for the NFL, but it's still so this may seem inadequate or not worthy of talking about, but let's say it is 96, 97%. To do it twice, you multiply those two numbers, it drops to like 90%. So
but I'm not saying do it twice.
Well, yeah, you're not, but others are.
Right.
Okay, you're not.
Sure.
Yes.
No.
And then the other thing is, and I'm gathering this number from the podcast, and I would need to know this number as well, the number of 2-point conversions that succeed. Apparently, it's like 53 to 55%, apparently. So
I have much lower odds of getting two. So if it's 50%, now I got to do it twice. I'd be curious what the success rate for people who have to do it twice.
Yeah.
Well,
the math would tell you that it's probably only about whatever 55 times 55 is. It's,
but like in a game,
40%.
What is the success rate for teams that have to do it more than once? Because a lot of that's going to be factored in by like what Florida State did against Georgia Tech, right? Where they kind of trick you into getting a 2-point conversion. I'd be very curious to see what the data is for late game 2-point conversions, because that's the other thing too, is stats people don't take into account, again, the human element, which is lining up for a 2-point conversion in the first quarter of the first game of the year is a whole different animal than what LSU did 2 years ago, where it's against Bama. It's the fourth quarter. There's literally no time for anything to happen except this is it. Game's on the line. It's like with anything, hey, you may be great, Mark, with your short game. If you're a golfer and your short game's pretty good, but try doing that when the Masters is on the line. You know what I mean? It's a different animal.
Sure.
But I'm okay going for the win, like I said. And here's the other thing too, is if you let's say you get the 2-point conversion the first time, and now you're down 6, now you're going to kick an extra point to win. So the game is now in the hands of a long snapper or short snapper who very rarely plays, a holder who rarely plays, a kicker who rarely plays, and a lot of times backup offensive linemen, and they got to now kind of nut up and do their job. Or do I have them kick the extra point when there's not as much pressure, and then when the game is on the line, I've got my quarterback, I've got my starting offensive line, and I got my best skill players on the field, and I'm going to have them go win the game. That's kind of where I'm at with it. But I'm okay going for the win. I actually like teams to be a little bit more aggressive in those situations late in games. That's why I love the call that Brian Kelly made 2 years ago. I'm just not doing it the first time.
Okay. Well, your head coach was going to kick 2 extra points.
I get that. I mean, the head coach is also someone who felt that Audric Estime should have gone down late in the game against Duke last year. That's what happens when you get defensive-minded head football coaches. But you were asking me my opinion, and I gave you my opinion. I'm also an offensive
it's a great
coach.
response.
But, also the other thing, too, is for him, he's got an elite defense that was top 3 in college football last year in red zone defense. So that's the other thing you have to take into account. To your point, in his mind, I've got an elite defense with a bunch of veteran players, and we had one of the best red zone defenses in all of college football last year. Every snap in overtime is a red zone snap, right? So, and Notre Dame was a pretty decent red zone offense last year. So those are things that factor into it as well. 2 years ago, when Notre Dame had the 130th red zone defense in the country, I might have had a different take on that one, but those are all the human factors that you have to go in. Just in theory, however, to me, I'm just an aggressive coach, Mark. I'm one of those people, like, I want the ball to start the game, even though the numbers tell me differently. I'm an offensive guy, right? I want to put my guys on the field and let's go score and let's put this team behind the 8 ball. I know the stats say otherwise, but I like winning. I like going for wins, unless there's a particular reason not to. But I think you have to be smart about when you do it.
Yeah, because you understand the whole mentality of if we got the ball in our hands at the end of the first half, then we're going to get the second half kickoff. We can
Right.
have back-to-back possessions.
Right. Right. So I mean, again, who are you and who are you playing? There's so many
Yeah.
things that go into it. Are you at home? Are you away? There's a lot of things that go into it, but more often than not, I'm a go for the win guy.
The reason
On the second touchdown.
Yeah, it's a good response too. So I get your point. I didn't expect that. Number one ND fan, the reason I highlighted your comment here is if you don't score the second touchdown, the whole scenario is null and void anyway. So that's why.
No, but what he's saying is you've used your 2-point conversion for nothing for future games. That's kind of
Okay.
That's where I'm taking his comment. Because again, every coach has a small handful of 2-point conversion plays that he has. And if you're going to use them, use them. Like Florida State's a different deal because they did a swinging gate thing. So like you didn't really use that one. That's not a 2-point play. You only have a couple of them that you can practice. And you're going to use when you use them, you use your best stuff, right? So if you use it and even if it works, but then you don't get the second touchdown, like, okay, now I just used it and it didn't matter because we ended up not winning the game anyway. And now my best 2-point play is out the window because that's the one thing that team is going to be prepared for the next time we go do it. And that's why I pointed to the 2015 game. You used your best 2-point play early in that game. Then you used your best, goal to go situation to score. And then you went to that play to try to tie it late and they were prepared for it. They stopped it. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. You only have so many of those plays. And that's what I'm saying. If I'm going to use it, I'm going to use it to where it really matters. And I know that something is being decided with this particular play.
No, it's a great comeback there. No, I appreciate the explanation. And the one thing I didn't appreciate about the exchange between Marcus Freeman and this guy is that unless they have their buddies and have some kind of great relationship, the podcaster, whoever it was extremely condescending and just.
I've seen a couple of his clips before. I think that's just his shtick.
Okay.
Let me be a big, knucklehead and act like I know it all. But isn't he a Barstool Sports guy, I think? Or something
I think that's what it was. Yeah. Because if I've got Marcus Freeman on the show and I'm not like bowing to him, like I've got to like agree with everything I would certainly challenge him, but I'm paying him a ton of respect for being who he is and knowing the football that he does. All right, Brian, appreciate you being here. And folks, we do this every Wednesday night, just after 8:00 Eastern time. And finally, I want to hit you with just this Northern Illinois bunch and what you want to see out of Notre Dame this week as a stepping stone or a building block coming off Texas A&M.
From a coaching standpoint, it's improving the areas that you didn't play well in the first game. So defensively, tackle better, limit penalties. Offensively, you obviously want to continue to limit penalties as well. But, I want to see greater efficiency in the run game. I want to see the pass game get going. Like, look, it worked against A&M, but A&M's not Georgia. They're not Ohio State. You're not going to say, hey, yes, I know that the last 2 years, 23 points would have had you 2-0 against Ohio State. I understand that. But, like, we're talking about when the chips are, it was 24 points would have been good enough to beat Ohio State in the first game of the year 2 years ago. But you needed 42 points to beat them in the semifinals of the college football playoff if you're Georgia, right? Like, it's a different animal in that level. And so in order to get there, your pass game is going to have to get better. So and this is actually a pretty good group of 5 pass defense. They were top 30 nationally last year. They've got a lot of guys coming back. So it'll be a good test for Notre Dame in that regard. I want to see them get better throwing the football. And the offense is going to have to kind of find some rhythm. I understand whether in the opener you're playing a heck of a defense, but this week I want to see the offense get rolling.
With the transfer portal being what it's been, I always find it interesting on these group of 5 teams because I always find a couple guys on the Power 5 level that have been knocked down a peg that have, but I don't see anybody necessarily.
They have a lot of guys coming back that were from the team from last year. And some of their portal guys, Mark, are guys that were portal guys previously. So they're now in multiple years at Northern Illinois. So they're a very veteran team. I'm surprised. I mean, their running back had 1,296 yards last year. Somebody in the chat on our show today was like, "How did that guy not go to a Power 5 team?" And I'm like, I agree. I mean, I'm surprised. Nobody scooped him up. But Thomas Hammock, who's a Northern Illinois alum, I mean, you probably remember him when he was a running back-to-back 1,000-yard guy at Northern Illinois. Really good running back. He's built some loyalty there, and those kids stuck it out because there's some good football players there. But that's another thing that's going to make them, I think, a very competitive MAC team this year for that league crown, is they are a very veteran team, and I think they're much better quarterback this year than they were last year as well. But it should be game Notre Dame rolls. I just want to see some improvement. As a coach, you always want to improve in the areas where you didn't keep doing what we're doing that works, but let's get sharper in some of those other areas.
All right, folks, you only have about 16 hours and you can catch Brian again here, 1 p.m. Eastern time on Irish Breakdown. So get psyched up for that. Anything in particular you guys are breaking down on Thursday?
We do our Keys to Victory segment. Then we do our predictions. So we'll make our Notre Dame, Northern Illinois predictions. And then at 2 o'clock, I bring on Bill Bender from Sporting News, and he and I will preview the 4 big games from this weekend, or the 4 most interesting games for us. We'll talk Michigan, Texas. We'll talk Iowa, Iowa State. We'll talk Nebraska, Colorado, and we'll talk Tennessee, NC State. So
nice.
I have a feeling that Texas-Michigan game might take a little bit more time for us to discuss than maybe some of those other games, Mark, I think.
Yeah,
so.
I would think so. Yeah, Bill's a good guy. We've had Bill on a number of times as well. Great stuff. Brian, appreciate you doing this. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the game on Saturday.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, folks, we'll see you at the Voice of College Football on the main channel. That'll be at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So be with me on the main channel. So we are focusing this show on the Notre Dame channel each and every week on the main channel, 10 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday with me. We'll see you then. Thanks for being here.